Shalom, my friends, and welcome to another episode of a Pilgrim Warriors Progress. And today is a special seasonal episode, and not in the way you might think I mean the word seasonal, but my hope is to communicate some of the general ideas of what has been happening to me as a pilgrim in this world, a pilgrim and a stranger, on my way to the celestial city in this season of life. And this might be a bit different than some of my other videos because often I open with some sort of thought-provoking comment or question, dive right into that, and tie it into some concept that's related to something happening in my experience as a pilgrim, and I go on for a few minutes pertaining to some of those themes and how it pertains to the Bible and other writings and things like that, and try to draw some sort of moral or practical lesson from that experience. But today, there's a lot more to say, and I wanted to start doing maybe like weekly update types of things because the week just ended and a lot has happened, and I could sit here and press stop and start and stop and start, but I think I might do well to touch upon just some of the events in my pilgrimage. So this is a much longer introduction than usual, but I just wanted to introduce this idea so that if there's a playlist of the seasonal episodes, if I choose to call them that, then, or a weekly update type of thing, then this will offer some sort of series introduction to the people who come and watch later. So welcome people from the future, and welcome people from around the time this is uploaded. And thank you all for watching, thank you for subscribing, thank you for sharing and liking and all that stuff. I really appreciate your support. This channel is very young, very new, and for those in the future, you can know that around this time the channel has about 16 subscribers, and then the Open the Armory, the main channel I work on, has it's approaching 600 now. So it is going well, and I am very thankful. So a few of the things I wanted to touch upon were this week and in this season of life, the past few weeks, I've really been surrendering to what the Lord would have me to do. I was in South Carolina for some time, and I felt that I was called to come up to Pennsylvania to be present as a moral and emotional support to a dear brother and his wife who were going through some things. And it was a privilege to be called up and to be asked and requested to be a comforter in a certain sense. Obviously, I am no substitute, and I am by no means in any way comparable or superior to our true comforter, who is Christ, through his Spirit. And but that word, comforter, that John uses twice, he uses it, we have one advocate with the Father, referring to Christ, and he says, and then comforter he uses in John 14, I think. And that word, it means someone to stand by you. And sometimes we are just desperate for someone to simply stand by us, to stand by our side and be supportive and be an encouragement to us. So I was asked to come and be a comforter, to be an advocate, to be, maybe not an advocate in the English sense, but to be someone who would stand by my brother and his wife. And it was a privilege. And I came up here to Pennsylvania. I really embrace the words that describe Abraham in a book called Patriarchs and Prophets that says, Abraham knew that the happiest place on earth for him was where God would have him to be. And as a man who's a as a man who's a pilgrim warrior, and I have sojourned and been a wayfarer, a pilgrim and a stranger in a strange land, obviously through the wilderness of this world, this life, but furthermore through the literal country. And most of my travels at this point has been in the United States, but I pray the Lord would lead me as He sees fit, and that I can surrender and yield not to temptation along the way, but yield to His will and His plan for me. And that is what I've really been striving to do, is to walk with God day by day, trust in Him. One of my father's favorite verse, I think, or verses, are found in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, and he likes to quote a different version that I am not familiar with, but he memorized it years ago. And that really shows you that if you train up a child in the way he should go, and when he grows older, he will not depart from it. Because he learned that about, I think, 40 years ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago. And he quotes it from time to time, but in the King James it reads, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths." And that might be a word or two off, but that's the general idea. And we can choose to trust Him. We can choose to be content. Paul tells us in Philippians chapter 4, "I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." That He knows how to be hungry, He knows how to be healthy, He knows how to be sick, He knows how to be tired, He knows how to be content in any situation. This is coming from a man who was shipwrecked, stoned with actual stones, not the modern use, who was bitten by a snake, who was just persecuted and hated and despised, hunted down, imprisoned. This is a man who describes all that suffering as a light affliction, saying, "For our light affliction worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." While we can faithfully look at the things that are temporal, things that are eternal, for the things that are temporal, they just pass away. There's nothing permanent or meaningful ultimately about them. The only value we have is the good that we can do in this life, and that God uses us to do that good, because He works in us to will and to do of His good pleasure. And every good and perfect gift comes from above, and when we do good, and our behavior, our actions are gifts to others, we can trust that it is a goodness from above that is working through us. So if we trace back the thought pattern, we go back to the light affliction, and then we go back to contentment, and we go back to trusting. And it reminds me of the words of Christ when He said that even the Son of Man has nowhere to lay His head. And in 1 Timothy chapter 6, it reads, "Having food and raiment, therewith be content." And this is the context in which the love of money is the root of all evil, and it's the love of money, not money itself, because it's that covetousness that's disruptive, and that avarice, that greed, that is damaging. So take a moment and think about that text that says, "Having food and raiment, food and clothing, to be content with those things," to be content with just that little bit. And notice for a moment what is said and what is unsaid, because it does not say having food and raiment and a horse, having food and raiment and a car, having food and raiment and a home, having food and raiment and the other clothing that you really want. It just says basic clothing, just clothing as a category, and it just says food. It doesn't say the food you covet, the food you desire. It's just food and clothes. And to learn to be content with those things. And we look at the life of Christ. What did He have in His life? He had, the shoes on his feet, his seamless garment, and he ate. He had food. And he traveled, he was a pilgrim, he was a stranger. He laid his head down wherever he could. But the Bible never describes any special place in his adult life that he called home. His home was wherever the Lord had him to be. His Father was there with him by the Spirit. And he was able to always be home, even though some might have called him homeless. And we need to strive to have that sort of peace and contentment wherever the Lord would have us to be, and also to be willing to surrender for Him to lead us. Because I have never been more blessed in my life than when I've been in total harmony and total surrender to the will of my Father in heaven. And it just brings me so joy. The Bible tells us in Psalm 16 verse 11, "Thou wilt show me the path of life. At thy right hand is fullness, joy, and pleasures forevermore." The exact wording escapes me, but pleasures and joy are at the very right hand of God, and He will show us the path of life. We can trust Him to lead us, for we walk by faith, not by sight, as 2 Corinthians 5:7.